"We found you a nice place, Mom. Don't make this harder than it has to be." That is what my daughter-in-law said to me on Mother's Day, while she loaded my suitcase into the trunk of her car. My son was in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes on the floor. He said nothing. I did not cry. I did not beg. I walked to the car, sat down, and closed the door. The magnolia tree Remy planted the year Derek learned to ride a bike disappeared in the side mirror, and then the house was gone. By Tuesday, their mortgage had bounced, their insurance had lapsed, their credit cards started declining one by one, like dominoes falling in a house they did not realize was built on my name. They thought they were putting me away. They had no idea they were unplugging themselves. If you have ever been told you are no longer needed by the people you spent your whole life taking care of, stay with me. Because what I found at the place they sent me was worse than I expected. And what I did about it was something nobody, including me, saw coming. Lauren drove. She talked the whole way. Sunrise gardens this, activities that. "You will love the garden, Mom." She used her professional voice, the one I had heard through the kitchen wall when she thought I was not listening. Smooth, measured, the voice of a woman who places people for a living. I sat in the back seat and held a photograph in my lap. My boy Derek, 5 years old, dressed in a crawfish costume I sewed by hand for the Bro Bridge Festival. On the back, in Remy's pencil, "Our little lobster." It was the only thing I grabbed from the refrigerator on my way out. My earrings, the fleur-de-lis my mama gave me when I turned 18, I left on the nightstand. I do not know why. Maybe because they belonged to a woman who still believed she would always have a kitchen to cook in. "Remy," I thought, watching Durham slide past the window, "you would have stood in that doorway and blocked the car. You would have said, 'Over my dead body.' But you have been dead 8 years, Chur, and nobody blocked anything." When we arrived, Lauren walked me to the front desk, signed some papers, kissed my cheek, and said, "Call me if you need anything, Mom." The whole thing took 11 minutes. I counted. In the time it takes to hard-boil an egg, I went from having a home to having a room number. The building did not look like the brochure. The brochure had sunlight and yoga and tomato plants. The building had fluorescent lights that buzzed like tired insects, and a hallway that smelled like bleach laid over something older and sadder that bleach could not reach. My room was at the end of the hall. Single bed, thin mattress, a window that faced the staff parking lot. I hung the crawfish photograph on a nail hole left by whoever lived here before me. Derek, 5 years old, grinning with no front teeth. Our little lobster. For a moment the room was less a room, and more a place where someone might actually sleep. The intake form was on the nightstand. I had filled it in at the front desk, the same way I had filled in hundreds of intake forms for other people's parents during my 25 years as a home health aide, only this time the name at the top was mine. At the bottom of the form, under a line labelled "Referring Agent," there was a signature, neat, professional, Lauren Kessler, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. I did not know what Magnolia Senior Care Solutions was, but I knew Lauren's handwriting. And I knew she had signed this form before I ever saw the brochure. She had planned this, weeks ago, maybe months. I tucked that detail into the back of my mind the way you tuck a receipt into your wallet. You do not know yet if you will need it, but you keep it. That first night I lay on my back and counted ceiling tiles, 17 across. The building made sounds I did not recognize. Pipes, doors, someone coughing 3 rooms down in a rhythm that never stopped. "Remy," I said in my head. Not out loud, just in my head, the way I have talked to him since he died. "Remy, the roux is still on the stove." I left it unfinished. For the first time in 40 years, if he were here, he would have said, "Coco, you cannot save the whole world before breakfast. Stop trying." He was probably right. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Derek. "I am sorry, Mom. Lauren says, this is best." I read it. I did not reply. Somewhere in Durham, my son was staring at a screen that said read, and what I did not know yet, what I would not learn for 3 more days, was that the place Lauren had chosen for me was hiding something far worse than bad oatmeal and buzzing lights. And the first clue was already in my hands, at the bottom of an intake form in my daughter-in-law's own handwriting. The next morning I did what I have always done. I got up. I washed my face. I walked. I have never been good at sitting still. Remy called it my engine. He said I came factory installed with a motor that would not turn off. 25 years of home health work does that to a person. You learn to move through a building the way water moves through pipes. You see things. A ceiling stain that means a leak nobody fixed. A wheelchair with a flat tire parked in the same spot for 3 days. A call button pressed 6 times in a row before anyone responds. I walked every hallway in Sunrise Gardens that morning, and I saw all of it. The sunroom was at the far end of the east wing. It was the only room in the building where the light came through actual windows instead of tubes. 3 people were sitting there, and they were the only people I had seen in 24 hours who looked like they were still paying attention. The first was a woman in her 70s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a spiral notebook open on her lap. She was writing in small, precise script, the kind you only see from people who spent decades working with numbers. The second was a man close to 80, square-jawed, sitting very straight, holding a smartphone the way you hold a foreign object you do not trust. The third was a woman in her early 70s with silver hair cut short and sharp, reading a newspaper that was at least 2 weeks old. She was not reading it for the news, she was studying structure. The woman with the notebook looked up when I walked in. New arrival? Yesterday. Who put you here? My daughter-in-law. She closed her notebook and took off her glasses. Honey, half of us were put here by our daughters-in-law, the other half by our sons. Welcome to the club. She extended her hand. Irene Massey, 41 years in hospital accounting. Retired, supposedly. The man with the phone looked up. Wallace Eaton, county clerk, 42 years. Also retired. Also supposedly. He held up the phone. My grandson gave me this. I have taken 200 photographs, and every single one is of my own thumb. The woman with the newspaper did not look up. Faye Delacroix, journalist, 33 years at the Raleigh News and Observer. She turned a page. I have been here 4 months. I have opinions. I pulled up a chair. I had not been invited, but I sat down anyway. My mama used to say I could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with everybody's phone number and a casserole dish that was not mine. Colette Thibodeau, I said. Coco. And I can already tell you that whoever runs this building is cutting corners with a chainsaw. Irene smiled. Faye turned another page. Wallace accidentally took a photograph of the ceiling fan. I spent the rest of that morning listening. Irene told me about the billing statements she received every month. Physical therapy, 3 times per week. Medication reviews, monthly. Occupational therapy, consultations, bi-weekly. I have not seen a physical therapist since I arrived, she said. Not once. 7 months. And I am a hospital accountant, Colette. I spent 41 years reading statements exactly like this. These numbers are not mistakes. Mistakes are random. These are patterns. Wallace told me about the complaints he had tried to file. He knew the system. He knew the forms, the agencies, the chain of command at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. But nobody listens to an old man in a nursing home who cannot take a photograph without capturing his own thumb. Faye told me nothing. She just watched. When I asked her what she thought, she said, I think this building has a story, and I think nobody with a functioning press credential has walked through that front door in years. That afternoon my phone rang. My sister Odette, calling from Baton Rouge, voice sharp enough to strip paint off a Buick. Coco Marie Thibodeau, you tell me right now what is happening. I told her. All of it. The brochure, the suitcase, the doorway, Derek saying nothing. Odette was quiet for 4 seconds. That is a geological event for Odette. I told you about that girl, she said. I told you the day you met her. She smiles too wide, Coco. People who smile that wide are selling something. Odette, I need you to do something for me. Find me a lawyer in Durham who handles elder law, and find out what company Lauren works for. There was a name on my intake form, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. I need to know what that means. Odette did not ask why. She said, "Give me 2 days," and hung up. That night, Zoe called Derek. I did not hear this conversation until weeks later, but Derek told me about it eventually. His daughter, 6 years old, picked up his phone and said, "Daddy, when is Grandma Coco coming home from her vacation?" Derek told her soon. He did not know what else to say. After he hung up, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the brochure Lauren had left on the kitchen table. Sunlight, yoga, tomato plants. He turned it over, looking for something, though he could not have told you what. He did not find it, and 3 floors below where I was lying in a room that smelled like industrial laundry, there was a woman I had not met yet. She was lying in her own room, staring at her own ceiling, and she used to work in this building before they fired her for asking the wrong question. I did not know her name, but I would. And when she told me what she knew, the signature at the bottom of my intake form would stop being a detail and start being evidence. By my 3rd morning at Sunrise Gardens, I had learned 3 things. First, breakfast was served at 7:15 and consisted of oatmeal that could double as drywall paste. Second, the call buttons in the East Wing took an average of 14 minutes to get answered. I timed them. Old habit. Third, Irene Massey was not confused. She was keeping score. That morning in the sunroom, Irene opened her notebook to a page near the middle, columns of dates, dollar amounts, and service codes in that small, steady accountant's handwriting. "Look at this," she said. "This is what my monthly statement says I received last month. Physical therapy, 3 times per week. Medication review, occupational therapy, consultation." She tapped the page with her pen. "I have not seen a physical therapist since I arrived. Not once in 7 months. No one has reviewed my medication since intake, and I do not know what an occupational therapy consultation is, but I promise you it did not happen." "Who is being billed?" I asked. "Medicare, and my supplemental. They are billing for services I have never received. I spent 41 years reading statements exactly like this, Colette. These numbers are not mistakes. Mistakes are random. These are patterns." Wallace leaned forward in his chair. "I have been trying to document it, but every time I try to photograph something with this phone, it captures the ceiling instead of the paper." I took the phone from his hands, flipped the camera, and handed it back. "Point. Tap the circle." Wallace aimed at Irene's notebook. Tap. A perfectly clear photograph. "Well," he said, looking at the screen, "that is considerably better than the ceiling fan." Faye set down her newspaper. "Photographs are evidence, but evidence without a story is just data. If you want to do something about what Irene found, you need someone who can turn those numbers into something a reporter would print and a prosecutor would read. And you know how to do that," I said. "I did it for 33 years. Faye folded the paper precisely. "Just because the newspaper stopped paying me does not mean I stopped knowing how." I looked at the 3 of them, a retired accountant who could read numbers the way I read a patient's vitals, a county clerk who had spent 42 years filing every form North Carolina had ever invented, a journalist who still thought in headlines, 3 people the world had parked in a building and forgotten about. Wallace looked at me. "So why are you doing this? You have been here 3 days. You do not know us. You could call your son, go home, and pretend this place does not exist." I opened my mouth to say the thing I always say. "Because somebody has to." Wallace raised one hand before I could finish. "That is a habit," he said, "not a reason." He was right, and I did not have a better answer. Not yet. That afternoon I went to the garden, and I used the word generously. A square of packed dirt, 2 wooden benches, a bird bath that had not held water in what looked like years. A woman was sitting on the far bench, alone, somewhere around 70, hands folded in her lap. She had the posture of someone who had stopped expecting company a long time ago. I sat down beside her. She did not look up. "You do not want to get close to me," she said. "Last person who was nice to me here got moved to another wing." "My name is Coco," I said, "and I have been getting close to people who do not want me close for 25 years. It is basically my profession." She almost smiled. Almost. Ruby. Ruby Owens. I did what I always do. Asked questions. Small ones. Where she was from. How long she had been here. Whether the oatmeal had always tasted like drywall, or if they had recently downgraded. Ruby answered in short sentences. Careful. Like someone testing ice she was not sure about. Then I asked the question that changed everything. "How did you end up here, Ruby?" She looked at me for a long time. "I used to work here," she said. "The garden was very quiet. I was a nurse. Right here, 11 years, night shift. I knew every patient on the second floor by name, by medication, by what made them laugh, and what scared them at 3 in the morning. What happened?" I asked a question. A patient's family wanted to know why their mother was being charged for physical therapy she never received. I pulled the records. The numbers were wrong, not a little. Wrong the way numbers are wrong when someone is making them wrong on purpose. "You reported it." I reported it to the administrator. He told me I was confused. Said billing was handled by an outside company, and I did not understand the codes. Ruby's jaw set. "I have been a nurse for 34 years. I understand codes just fine." A week later, I was terminated. Performance issues. No prior warnings. A meeting on a Friday afternoon, and a box for my things. "And then you ended up back here. You want to know the cruelest part?" Ruby turned to face me fully. "They fired me. I lost my employer insurance. My blood pressure went through the roof. My daughter could not afford home care. And the only facility within 30 miles that accepted Medicaid was right back here. Same building, same hallway, same administrator who called me confused, now signs off on my medication." That sat between us for a moment. The bird bath caught a stripe of afternoon sun. "Ruby," I said, "when you were still working here, the patients who came in through placement companies, did someone from the company do the intake paperwork?" Ruby nodded slowly. "A woman. Same one every time. She came in, did the forms, shook hands with the administrator, and left through the side door, not the front, like she did not want to be seen." "Do you remember her name?" Ruby shook her head. "I remember her face, and I remember the side door. That night I lay in bed counting ceiling tiles. 17. But I was not counting for comfort anymore. I was counting to stay awake, because my mind would not stop moving. A woman from a placement company signed intake forms here. The same type of signature was on my intake form. Lauren Kessler, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. The billing was wrong while Ruby worked here. The billing was still wrong now. And the woman who came through the side door, the one Ruby could not name, came from the same kind of company Lauren worked for. I did not have proof. Not yet. But I had Irene's notebook, Wallace's knowledge of every filing system in the state, Faye's instinct for a story, and Ruby's memory of a side door and a face she never forgot. What I did not have was a reason Wallace would accept. He asked me why I was helping, and I could not answer. But the next morning, Irene knocked on my door at 6:15, her notebook open to a page that made her hands shake, and the name at the top of that page was one I recognized. Irene was standing in my doorway at 6:15 in the morning, holding her notebook the way someone holds a document they wish they had never found. "I could not sleep," she said, "so I went through the older billing statements, the ones from before I arrived, the ones the front desk keeps in a filing cabinet they forgot to lock." She held the notebook open. At the top of the page, in Irene's careful handwriting, was a name, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. "That name," I said, "that is on my intake form." "It is on 16 intake forms," Irene said. 16 patients admitted in the past 2 years, all referred by the same company, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. And every single one of those 16 patients has billing statements that include services they could not possibly have received. Physical therapy for a woman with no legs, Colette. Occupational therapy for a man in a coma. She closed the notebook. This is not sloppy bookkeeping. This is systematic. I sat on the edge of my bed. The crawfish photograph watched me from the wall. Derek, 5 years old, grinning like the world was a good and simple place. Ruby, I said. Ruby told me a woman from a placement company used to come here and do intake paperwork. Same woman every time. Left through the side door. Irene nodded. If the referring agent and the billing are connected, then whoever is sending patients here knows what is happening to the billing after they arrive. They are not just placing people, they are feeding them into a machine. I picked up my phone and called Odette. I need you to find out something specific, I said. The company Lauren works for. Is it called Magnolia Senior Care Solutions? Odette was quiet for 2 seconds. Give me until tonight, she said. I have a friend whose daughter works at the county clerk's office. Business registrations are public record. After she hung up, I sat there for a long time. If Odette came back and said yes, if Lauren's company was Magnolia, then my daughter-in-law had not just put me in a bad nursing home. She had put me in a nursing home that was defrauding Medicare, and she had done the paperwork herself. That was not a daughter-in-law who wanted space. That was a daughter-in-law who wanted commission. But I did not have confirmation yet. And until I did, it was just a name on a page and an old nurse's memory of a side door. That night I could not sleep either, so I did what I have always done when I cannot sleep. I cooked. The nursing home kitchen was unlocked after 10. Nobody used it because the staff microwave in the break room handled everything. But there was a stove, and there were pots, and in my suitcase I had packed 3 things Lauren did not know about. A bag of frozen okra from the back of the freezer, a bottle of hot sauce from the pantry, and a small jar of roux I had made the week before and stored in a mason jar because you never know when you might need a proper roux. By 11:30, I had a pot of gumbo going. Not my best. No andouille, no crab, but the roux was right and the okra was holding, and by midnight the smell had crawled up the stairwell and down the second-floor hallway like an uninvited guest with excellent timing. Irene appeared first. Then Wallace, in a bathrobe and slippers, carrying his phone like a flashlight. Then Faye, fully dressed at midnight, because Faye is the kind of woman who is always fully dressed. Then Ruby, moving slowly, standing in the doorway like she was not sure she was allowed. Get in here, I said. There is enough for everyone. The night nurse found us at 12:30. 5 old people sitting around a stainless steel prep table eating gumbo out of styrofoam cups. Mrs. Thibodeau, she said, this is a medical facility. Honey, I said, this gumbo is medicine. She stood there for a moment. Then she pulled up a chair. That was the last good hour for a while. At 3 in the morning, after everyone had gone back to their rooms, I was walking the hallway. I do that. The engine. I heard a call button buzzing from the room at the far end. Buzzing and buzzing. Nobody came. I walked to the door. An old woman was lying in bed, shaking, reaching for a cup of water on a table just beyond her fingers. Her call button light was on. It had been on for 22 minutes. I checked the time stamp on the panel by the door. I got her the water. I held the cup. I sat with her until she stopped shaking and closed her eyes. And then I looked down at my hands, and I saw them. My hands, holding a stranger's empty cup, in the dark, in a building where nobody knew I was awake. And it hit me the way certain things hit you only when the building is quiet and there is nobody around to distract you from yourself. This was Mr. Guidry, not the same man. He died 46 years ago, on the floor of his bathroom, holding a photograph of a family that never came. But this was the same scene, the same dark hallway, the same unanswered call button, the same woman sitting at the bedside because she could not stand the idea of someone being alone. Only this time, the woman at the bedside was also the one who was alone, and the family that never came was mine. I went back to my room, lay down, stared at the ceiling. 17 tiles, and for the first time in my life, When I heard another call button buzz down the hallway, I did not get up. I lay there and listened to it ring and ring and ring. Something in me that had been running for 66 years went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the quiet of a machine that has run out of fuel. I did not get up the next morning at my usual time. Irene knocked at 8. I told her I was tired. She left. Wallace knocked at 9. I said the same thing. He looked at me through the crack in the door. The way people look at someone they are not sure they believe. I was Nikkei. K. Why do I help? Because people need me? Or because I need to be needed? And if the answer is the second one, then what does that make me? A caretaker? Or a woman who cannot survive without someone to take care of? I did not get up until my phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Odette. Coco, she said. Her voice was different, flat. The way Odette sounds when she is trying not to yell. Tell me, I said. Lauren Marie Kessler, Patient Placement Coordinator, Magnolia Senior Care Solutions, LLC, registered in Wake County. I found it on LinkedIn, and I confirmed it through the Secretary of State Business Registry. Odette paused. That girl is not just your daughter-in-law, Coco. She is the pipeline. She sends patients into that building, and she gets paid for every single one. I sat on the edge of my bed. The crawfish photograph was on the wall. Derek, 5 years old, grinning. Odette, I said. Call the lawyer. Tell him it is not just about me anymore. How many? Odette asked. 16, I said. At least 16. The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Odette said the thing only Odette would say. Mon Dieu, cette femme. I am going to enjoy watching this. She hung up. And the engine inside me, the one that had gone quiet 12 hours ago, turned over once. Then again. Not the same engine. Something different. Something that was not running on habit. I picked up the phone and called Irene. Get Wallace and Faye, I said. And Ruby. We need to talk. While I was calling Irene, 2 things were happening in Durham that I would not learn about until later. The first happened at a gas station on Guess Road. Lauren was standing at pump 7 with Zoe and the baby in the back seat. She slid her credit card into the machine. The screen blinked. Declined. She tried a second card. Declined. She pulled out the third, the one she used for groceries, the one she never worried about because it always worked. The machine asked her to enter the primary account holder's date of birth. Lauren typed in her own. Incorrect. She tried Derek's. Incorrect. She tried a third time, a number she was guessing at, and the screen locked her out entirely. Lauren stood at that pump for a full minute, phone in hand, staring at the screen the way a person stares at a door that was open 5 minutes ago and is now locked from the inside. She did not know whose birthday the machine was asking for. She had never needed to know, because the card had always worked. The birthday was mine. June 14th, 1959. And the card had always worked because I was the co-signer who made it possible, and 3 days ago I had called the bank from a nursing home payphone and removed my name. The second thing that happened was quieter. Derek was sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open, trying to pay the electric bill online. The payment portal asked for a login. He did not have one. He had never logged in because the bill had always been on autopay. He called the power company. A woman asked him to verify the account holder's name. He said his own. I am sorry, sir, she said. The account is under Colette Thibodeau. Derek called the mortgage company next. Same answer. He called the homeowner's insurance. Same answer. Every account, every bill, every automatic payment that had kept the lights on and the roof insured and the credit cards active for 8 years was running through a single name, and that name was not his. My son sat at that table for a long time after the last phone call. He told me later that the house was different. Not physically. Everything was in the same place. But it was like discovering that the floor you have been walking on your whole life is not concrete. It is glass. And underneath it, someone has been holding it up with both hands for years, and you never once looked down. He drove to Sunrise Gardens that afternoon without telling Lauren. The brochure was still in his car, tucked into the side pocket of the passenger door. He pulled it out in the parking lot. Sunlight, yoga, tomato plants. Then he looked up at the building, peeling paint, a window unit dripping condensation onto the sidewalk. The front garden was a patch of dead mulch with a sign that read, Sunrise Gardens, where every day is a good day. He walked through the front door and down the hallway. The smell registered first, then the lights, then the silence. The particular kind of silence that happens when a building is full of people and none of them are being listened to. He found my room. The door was open. I was not there. Derek stepped inside. Single bed, thin mattress, a window facing the parking lot where his car was now sitting, and on the wall, held by a nail that was not mine, the crawfish photograph, his 5-year-old face grinning back at him with no front teeth. Our little lobster. He told me later that he stood in that room for 10 minutes. He did not touch anything. He just stood there and looked at what his mother's life had become. A single bed, a nightstand, a photograph, and a window that faced a parking lot instead of a magnolia tree. He found me in the garden. I was sitting with Irene, Wallace, Faye, and Ruby. We had papers spread across the bench, and Wallace was attempting to photograph a billing statement with his phone, supervised closely by Irene to prevent another ceiling portrait. Derek stopped at the edge of the patio. I spotted him before he spotted me. My son, 37 years old, standing in the sun with his hands in his pockets, looking at his mother the way you look at someone you are seeing for the first time. I did not stand up. I did not wave him over. I did not run to him and say, "It is okay. Come here, sit down, let me fix this." That is what the old Coco would have done. The one who left her earrings on a nightstand in a house that was not hers anymore. Derek walked over. The squad went quiet. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked on the word. "Derek," he said. I did not know. He swallowed. "About the accounts. The mortgage. The insurance. I did not know any of it was in your name." "You did not ask," I said. That landed. I watched it land. His eyes moved to the papers on the bench, to the 4 people sitting around me, to the building behind us with its peeling paint and locked garden gate. "I'm going to bring you home," he said. "No," I said. "You are not." He blinked. "What?" "I am not ready to come home, Derek." He did not understand. I could see it on his face. He had driven here expecting to rescue me. He had expected to find his mother sitting alone and sad in a small room, waiting for her son to save her. Instead, he found her in a garden with 4 strangers and a stack of billing records, and she was telling him no. "There are people here who need help," I said. "And there is something wrong with this place. I am not leaving until I understand what it is." Derek looked at me. Then he looked at Irene, who was watching him with the calm, professional gaze of a woman who has audited larger men than him. He looked at Wallace, who had finally managed to photograph an actual document. He looked at Faye, who was taking notes. He looked at Ruby, who was staring at the ground. "Mom," he said quietly, "what is going on?" "Sit down," I said. "I will tell you what I know, and then you are going to go home and find out something for me." "What?" "I need you to go through Lauren's office, her files, her laptop if you can. I need you to find out exactly how many patients she has sent to this building, and whether she was paid for each one." Derek's face changed. Not all at once. In stages. Confusion first, then recognition. The slow, terrible kind that starts in the stomach and works its way up. "Lauren," he said. "Sit down, Derek." He sat, and for the first time in 8 years, I told my son something difficult instead of handling it for him. Derek did not find Lauren's files that night. He did not get the chance. Lauren was waiting for him when he came home from Sunrise Gardens. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone face down and her hands folded, and when Derek walked through the door, she said, "You went to see her," in a voice that was not a question. Derek told me later that he almost lied. Almost said he had gone to the store, gone for a drive, gone anywhere else. But he looked at Lauren's face and understood that she already knew. She had called the nursing home. The front desk told her, "She is my mother, Lauren, and she is punishing you." Lauren's voice was level, measured. The professional tone, the one she used on families when she placed their parents. She cut off the credit cards. She froze the accounts. She is sitting in that building doing exactly what she wants you to do, which is drive over there and beg her to come back so she can be in charge again. Lauren leaned forward. "Do you not see it, Derek? This is what she does. She controls everything. The money, the bills, the house. She made herself the center of your life so that if she ever left, you would fall apart. And now she is watching you fall apart from a lawn chair." Derek sat down across from her. He did not say anything for a while. "The building is not what the brochure showed," he said. "It is a transition," Lauren said. "The first week is always hard. There was no garden, Lauren. No yoga room. The hallway smelled like chemicals. Her room has a window that faces the parking lot." "Derek." Lauren reached across the table and held his hand. "I do this for a living. I have placed dozens of families. The first reaction is always guilt. It passes. Your mother is being cared for. She has staff, she has meals, she has activities. She is fine." She squeezed his hand. And Derek, because Derek is who Derek is, because he has spent 37 years choosing the path that avoids the fight, squeezed back. He did not go through her files that night. The next morning, Lauren made a phone call. Not to Derek, to the administrator at Sunrise Gardens. "Mrs. Thibodeau is agitating other residents," she said. Her voice was calm, clinical. "She is organizing group activities that are not on the approved schedule. For her own well-being, I recommend moving her to the West Wing. Quieter environment, less stimulation." The administrator agreed. Lauren was not just a family member making a suggestion. Lauren was the referring agent who brought patients to his building. Lauren was revenue. By noon, I was in a different room. Smaller. No sunroom access. The window faced a brick wall. They moved my suitcase while I was in the bathroom. When I came back, my crawfish photograph was lying face down on a bed I did not recognize. Irene found out an hour later. She came to the new room, looked at the brick wall, and said nothing for 10 seconds. "They separated you," she said. "Lauren called the administrator," I said. "I am sure of it." "We keep going," Irene said. "From where?" "I cannot reach the sunroom without a staff escort now. Wallace and Faye are on the east wing. Ruby is afraid to talk to me in the open." Irene looked at me the way an accountant looks at a column that does not balance. "Then we work separately and compare notes when we can." "I have been doing this for 7 months before you arrived, Colette. The notebook does not need a sunroom. It needs a pencil." She left. And I sat on the new bed and stared at the brick wall and asked myself a question I did not want to answer. I could call the lawyer right now. I could say, "Get me out of here." I had enough. I had the intake form. I had Irene's notebook. I had Ruby's testimony. I had Odette's confirmation. I could leave this building today, hand the evidence to the attorney, and let the system handle the rest. Save myself. Go home. Not this home, a new one. An apartment somewhere in Durham, with a kitchen of my own, and a door that locked from the inside. Or I could stay. Stay in this building with its brick wall windows, and its 14-minute call buttons, and its administrator who moved me because a woman with a clipboard told him to. Stay and keep fighting for Irene and Wallace and Faye and Ruby, 4 people I met 10 days ago who had been invisible to the world for years. And here was the question underneath the question, the one Wallace planted, and I could not shake. Was I staying because they needed me, or because I needed to be needed? Was this love? Or was this the engine, running on fumes, desperate for a purpose, because without one I was just an old woman in a room with a brick wall and a photograph? I did not know. And I did not know if it mattered, because Ruby was 3 hallways away and she was afraid, and Irene was counting numbers that could put people in prison, and Wallace was learning to photograph documents with a phone he still did not trust, and Faye was building a story, Nobody had asked her to write. They were doing this with or without me. The question was whether I would be in the room when it finished. My phone rang. Derek. "Mom," he said. His voice sounded different, tight. "Zoe brought home a drawing from school today. Family portrait. I waited. She drew you in a small box, away from the rest of us." Her teacher asked who that was. Zoe said, "That is Grandma Coco. She lives in a little room now." The line was quiet. "She drew the room, Mom. She drew the parking lot outside your window. She has never been to that place. She must have heard Lauren and me talking. She imagined it." His voice cracked. "She drew you alone." I closed my eyes. "Derek," I said, "are you ready to hear what I need to tell you?" "Yes." "Then go into Lauren's office. Open her laptop. Search for Magnolia Senior Care Solutions. Look at the referral records, count the names, and then call me back." The line was quiet again, longer this time. "Okay," Derek said. "Okay, Mom." He hung up, and I hung the crawfish photograph on the new wall, on a nail I pushed in with my thumb, next to a window that faced a brick wall instead of a magnolia tree. Derek called back at 11:45 that night. I was awake. I had been awake since 9. "Mom," he said, "I found the files." "How many names?" 23. His voice was barely there. "She has placed 23 people at Sunrise Gardens in the past 2 years. And there is a column in her spreadsheet, labeled commission. Mom, there are numbers next to every name. Including mine?" The silence told me everything. "Including yours," he said. Derek arrived at Sunrise Gardens the next morning, carrying a folder. Not a briefcase, not a bag. A plain manila folder, with printouts from Lauren's laptop, taken while she slept. 23 names, 23 referral records, 23 commission entries. And one of those names was mine. He was not alone. Behind him, a woman I had not met walked through the front door with a notebook and a recorder clipped to her jacket. Her name was Sandra Huang, and she was a reporter for the Durham Herald. Sunday Faye had called her former editor 3 days ago. The editor had called Sandra. Sandra had spent 48 hours confirming business registrations, cross-referencing Medicare billing databases, and pulling public records on Sunrise Gardens inspection history. 4 violations in 2 years, Sandra told me when we sat down in the garden. Understaffing, medication documentation failures, and 2 complaints filed by families about billing discrepancies. Both complaints were dismissed. "They were dismissed," Wallace said, "because the families gave up. Nobody fights a nursing home. The families are tired. The patients are old. The system counts on exhaustion." I looked at my squad. Irene had her notebook open. Wallace had his phone charged, and the camera pointed in the correct direction. Faye was sitting beside Sandra, the way a retired professor sits beside a promising student. Ruby was standing near the garden gate, arms crossed, watching the hallway through the window. "Ruby," I said, "you do not have to do this. I have been living in this building for 8 months, sleeping in a room down the hall from the man who fired me for telling the truth," Ruby said. "I am doing this." We laid it out. All of it. Irene went first. Her notebook covered 7 months of billing statements. She had tracked every service charged to her account and compared it against what she had actually received. The gap was not subtle. 43 physical therapy sessions billed, 0 received, 12 medication reviews billed, 1 received on intake day, occupational therapy consultations weekly for 7 months. She had never met an occupational therapist. Across 16 patients with similar billing patterns, Irene said, turning to a summary page, the estimated overbilling exceeds $340,000. That is Medicare money. That is taxpayer money. And that is only what I can document from the statements I had access to. Sandra wrote without looking up. Ruby went next. She explained how the billing worked from inside. Intake forms were filled out by the referring agent, the person from the placement company. The forms included preliminary care recommendations. Those recommendations became the basis for the billing codes. If the intake form said the patient needed physical therapy, the billing department coded physical therapy, whether a therapist ever walked through the door or not. The referring agent sets the table, Ruby said. The billing department eats. And the referring agent for 16 of those patients was the same person, I said. Sandra looked up. You are saying the referring agent knew the care recommendations would be used for billing purposes, regardless of whether the care was delivered. I am saying the referring agent signed my intake form, I said, and the referring agent is my daughter-in-law. The garden was quiet. A bird landed on the empty bird bath and left. Derek was sitting on the bench next to me. He had not spoken since we started. His hands were on his knees, his father's hands, Remy's hands, the hands of a man who used to fix things with pipe wrenches and patience. Derek, E said, it is time. He picked up his phone and called Lauren. She answered on the second ring. Hey babe, what is up? Casual, normal. The voice of a woman who thought the worst was over, that Derek had come around, that the crisis had passed. I found the spreadsheet, Lauren. Silence. 23 names. Commission records. Magnolia's referral agreements. I found all of it. Derek, I can explain. Those are standard industry records. Every placement coordinator keeps tracking documents. It is how the business works. There is a column labeled commission, Lauren. There is a dollar amount next to every name, including my mother's. That is not what it looks like. My mother is in a building that is billing Medicare for physical therapy. Nobody receives. She is here because you referred her. You get paid every time you send someone through that door, and you sent your own mother-in-law. Derek's voice was steady, not loud. Steady the way a man's voice gets when he has passed through anger and arrived at something colder. Did you know about the billing? Lauren did not answer immediately. And when she did, her voice was different. Not the professional voice, not the wife voice, something underneath both of those. You do not understand what it is like, she said. You grew up with a mother who made gumbo at midnight and sewed crawfish costumes and showed up for every single thing. You have no idea what it is like to grow up with nobody. 4 foster homes in 8 years, Derek. Nobody came for me. Nobody showed up. Nobody made me a costume. The line was quiet. At least your mother had a son who drove to the nursing home, Lauren said. Nobody ever drove anywhere for me. Then her voice closed. Click, like a door shutting from inside. The ISTP wall, the one I had watched her build around herself for 8 years of family dinners and forced smiles and brochures with tomato plants. Derek held the phone in his lap. He looked at me. She is not wrong about the foster care, he said quietly. No, I said. She is not. But being hurt does not give you permission to hurt other people for profit. And 23 families are paying for her pain right now. I took the phone from his hand. I did not call Lauren back. Instead, I dialed the number Wallace had written on a piece of paper 3 days ago. The North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services complaint line. A woman answered. I gave her my name. I gave her the name of the facility. I gave her the name of the referring agent and the name of the placement company. Then I said, I am a retired home health aide. I have spent 25 years taking care of other people's parents, and right now I am sitting inside a building that is defrauding Medicare, neglecting its residents, and being fed patients by a company that profits from every admission. I have billing records, internal testimony from a former employee, and referral documents. I would like to file a formal complaint. The woman on the other end asked me to hold. While I held, I looked around the garden. Irene was closing her notebook. Wallace was photographing the complaint phone number so he would have it for his records, and for the first time the photograph came out right. Faye was talking to Sandra in the low, precise tone of 2 journalists reviewing facts before publication. Ruby was sitting on the bench where I had first met her, hands folded, face still. Thank you for waiting, the woman said. An investigator has been assigned. Can you provide documentation? Ma'am, I said, I can provide 7 months of documentation, an eyewitness, a former staff member, and a journalist from the Durham Herald-Sun who is sitting 3 feet from me. The line was quiet for a moment. We will have someone at the facility by end of week. I hung up. Wallace looked at me. You know, Colette, when you walked into that sunroom 10 days ago, I thought you were just another new patient who would spend 6 months staring at the parking lot. What do you think now? I said. Wallace held up his phone. On the screen was a photograph he had taken that morning. The front hallway of Sunrise Gardens. Fluorescent lights, peeling paint, and above it all, the sign, Sunrise Gardens, where every day is a good day. I think, Wallace said, that sign is about to come down. 3 weeks later, the sign came down. Not metaphorically. A man from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services arrived on a Tuesday morning with a clipboard and 2 inspectors, and by Thursday afternoon Sunrise Gardens was under formal investigation. The administrator was suspended, pending review. The billing department was seized. 14 current residents were flagged for transfer to approved facilities, and the Office of Inspector General opened a parallel inquiry into Medicare fraud. Sandra Huang's article ran in the Durham Herald-Sun on a Saturday, front page, below the fold. The headline read, Durham Nursing Home Billed Medicare for Phantom Services. Former employee and residents allege. Irene's notebook was cited 11 times. Ruby was quoted by name. Wallace's photograph of the sign ran as the lead image. Faye bought 6 copies. She keeps them in her new room at Brightwater Senior Living, the facility the state transferred her to along with Irene and Wallace. Ruby went to a different facility closer to her daughter. She told me on the phone last week that the nurses at the new place actually answer the call button. It only takes 3 minutes, she said. I timed it. You would be proud. Lauren was terminated from Magnolia Senior Care Solutions the day the article published. Her employment records were subpoenaed as part of the federal investigation. I do not know what will happen to her legally. That is for the courts. What I know is that the spreadsheet Derek found, the one with 23 names and a commission column, is now in the hands of people whose job it is to read spreadsheets like that and decide what they mean. Derek filed for separation 2 weeks after the article. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment off Broad Street. First time in his life without a woman running the house around him. First time paying his own electric bill, his own groceries, his own rent. He called me after the first month and said, Mom, I had no idea how much toilet paper costs. I laughed. For the first time in a long time, I laughed because something was actually funny, and not because I was trying to hold myself together. I did not go back to Derek's house. I rented a small apartment near 9th Street, a second-floor walk-up with a kitchen just big enough for my cast-iron pot, and a window that faces east, so the morning sun comes through while I make my café au lait. I signed up to teach Cajun cooking again at the community center on Saturdays. The first class had 9 students, the second had 14, the third had 22, and a woman in the front row asked if I did private events. Remy would have said something about that, something like, Coco, you just escaped a nursing home, and now you are feeding strangers again. Some things do not change, but some things did. I put the earrings back on, the fleur-de-lis, my mama's. I had left them on a nightstand in a house that was not mine anymore, on a day when I was not sure I would ever have a kitchen again. Putting them back on was not dramatic. I just opened the small box Odette mailed me, looked at them in my palm, and clipped them on before Saturday's class. They are small. Nobody mentioned them, but I knew they were there, and that was enough. Derek came by on a Sunday afternoon with Zoe. He stood in the doorway of my apartment, the way he used to stand in the doorway of his own house. Arms at his sides this time, eyes up. Zoe did not wait. She ran through the door and grabbed my legs and said, Grandma Coco, your kitchen is tiny. And I said, Share, it is exactly the right size, and picked her up and kissed her forehead and smelled her hair, which smelled like crayons and strawberry shampoo, and everything good about the world that does not need explaining. Derek sat across from me at the small table, 2 cups of café au lait between us. The crawfish photograph was on the wall behind me, next to a new photograph Zoe had drawn at school, a family portrait. This time, Grandma Coco was not in a box. She was standing next to everyone else, tall, with big earrings and a pot in her hand. "Mom," Derek said, "I am sorry." I looked at my son, the man who had stood in a doorway and said nothing while his wife loaded my suitcase into a trunk. The man who had texted, "I am sorry." Lauren says, "This is best," while I lay on a strange bed, counting ceiling tiles. The man who had squeezed Lauren's hand instead of opening her files, and the man who had eventually opened the files, who had driven to a nursing home and seen a crawfish photograph on a bare wall, who had listened to his 6-year-old daughter describe a small box and decided that was enough. "I forgive you, Derek," I said. He exhaled. His shoulders dropped. "But," I said, his shoulders came back up. "I am not going back to being your safety net. You are 37 years old. It is time you learned to catch yourself. I will not pay your mortgage. I will not co-sign your cards. I will not handle your bills or make your phone calls or stand between you and the hard conversations you have been avoiding since you were 12. He nodded. Slowly. "And Derek, if anyone ever tells you something is best for Mom again, you come and ask Mom. Not their version. Mine." "I will," he said. "Good." I pushed the café au lait toward him. "Now, drink your coffee before it gets cold. And tell me about your new apartment. Does it have a magnolia tree?" "It has a parking lot," he said. "Then plant something," I said. He smiled. Small, but real. After he left, I stood at the kitchen window with my coffee. The sun was going down over Durham, orange and gold through the trees on 9th Street. My mama's earrings caught the light. "Remy," I said in my head. "I stopped trying to save the whole world before breakfast. You were right. It was too much. But I did save 4 people in a garden nobody tended. And somewhere between the gumbo and the billing records and the brick wall room, I saved myself. Not because I stopped caring, because I learned the difference between being needed and being loved. Being needed is a transaction. Someone has a problem, you fix it, they move on. Being loved is something else. Being loved is your granddaughter drawing you with big earrings and a pot in your hand, not because you fixed anything, but because you are Grandma Coco, and that is enough. Love is not staying at any cost. Love is being close when you are invited, stepping away when you must, and trusting that the door will open again. The door opened again. It just opens from my own kitchen now. If someone you love ever put you somewhere you did not belong, I hope you fought your way out. And if you did, I hope you did not go back to the same house. I hope you built your own, even if it is small, even if it has a parking lot instead of a magnolia tree. Plant something anyway. It will grow.